Our mandate is to cover the most important stories that exist. And apparently this is sort of a novelty, because if you think about the news, it's what I call the zone of low-hanging fruit. You know, I mean, did we ever hear a single news bulletin that actually gave us any information about that Malaysian plane? I mean, it's like they're running out the clock, you know, and, you know, Justin Timberlake did this, and, you know, the Kardashians did that, and so forth, and it's just... almost none of it is about anything, actually. And so we started talking about things like climate change and the growing plutocracy in this country, the fact that we elected a man who, what was it, hope you can believe in, or whatever his slogan was, you know, and you know, boy, but from that impassioned speech he gave in Lincoln Park to today, that's an awful long trip, and a pretty weird psychedelic one at that. Because he ain't the same guy. And then people say, well, you know, and so people either say, oh, I'm disgusted with him, or they say, I still like him. I still think he's a good man. And the problem is, he's not in charge. That's the thing that people don't get. And this is really what I discovered. This is what Family of Secrets is about, is that George W. Bush wasn't in charge either, because it's a culture. And there are thousands and thousands of people who are part of this particular culture, just like there are thousands of whatever culture you feel that you belong to, who are in another culture. And they work for police departments, and they work for corporations and that are involved with the military-industrial complex and so forth. And they have a very different view of the world, very different value system, very different appreciation of democracy, what it can be and what it should be. You know, their older relatives would just thought, you know, Francisco Franco was terrific, and you know, that Hitler had a few things to teach us, and so on. And so we there's so much propaganda about how democratic America is. Have you noticed that? There's more flag waving. There's more. I was on a radio show a few days ago, and it was a liberal show, nationally syndicated, but the usual host wasn't there, and they had this guest host, and she announced her liberal bona fides, and then she proceeded to talk about the Boston Marathon bombing, which I'd like to talk about a little bit, which we've been covering extensively on Who, What, Why. And she said, and you know, they invited me on to talk about the Boston Marathon bombing. I assumed they had read my stuff. Well, I guess she hadn't, because she said, don't know about you, but I am wearing my Boston Strong t-shirt. And maybe she asked me if I was, and I said, listen, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I am just not into the propaganda and the myth-making stuff. I'm here to talk about what really happened in Boston and what it means about the way that they were able to basically declare martial law and force everyone to stay in their homes. This had never been done before in this country, that almost nobody spoke about it or asked about it or questioned it, not the media, and not most institutions either. Not all those great institutions of higher learning in the Boston area. Those should have been at the forefront of raising questions. They're full of constitutional law professors and so on. Nobody really said anything. And then almost immediately we heard that they'd solved this. Did you notice that? They always solve everything really fast. I mean, they do. They solve everything really, really fast. It's never like Columbo or Agatha Christie. They get it in a second. And so I was thinking, boy, that FBI is really good. I mean, they're so good. And then I thought, you know, when I was working on Family of Secrets and I discovered that George H.W. Bush couldn't remember where he was on the day that John F. Kennedy, when John F. Kennedy was shot, we could talk about that later if you want, or you could just read the chapters in the book about him and the Kennedy assassination. But I became interested in the Kennedy assassination, and I was struck by that the FBI was so incompetent that they had Lee Henry Oswald, they had Harvey Lee Oswald, they couldn't find the files, and I thought either they're incredibly incompetent or they're doing that deliberately, or some combination of the two, both, and any combination, all pretty bad. But guess what? Here we are 50 years later, and they're doing the exact same stuff. And we have an article on Who, What, Why I hope you'll take a look at about the report that just came out from the inspectors general of all these different alphabet agencies, where they are, deliberately released at the time of the first anniversary of the bombing. And it's the most astonishing document because if you read it very quickly, it's kind of boring and hard to fathom. You sort of get a sense that they say, well, you know, they didn't do everything they could, but they did something, and there were some things we would do differently, and that's the end of it. That's, by the way, that's what all reports say. You could just use the same report, you know, year in and year out because it always says the same thing. And so I thought, let me take a closer look at this. And then I realized that what these inspectors general were basically saying was their hands were tied. They couldn't really dig in. They themselves had been obstructed by these agencies. They had to black out or redact a whole section, the most interesting and important section, which had to do with what relationship, if any, might have existed between the U.S. government and the alleged bombers themselves several years prior to the bombing. Well, you would think people would be interested in it. The media was not interested in this. Well, nobody seemed interested in that. Well, yeah, they knew them, but they didn't know them that well. I mean, you know, hello. I mean, it's just incredible. You know, they'll lock a young black kid up for, you know, allegedly once looking at a joint, you know, and yet here you've got, you know, the fire is awfully thick, not just smoke, but the fire's right there. And they say, yeah, well. And so I was looking at this, and I saw that this one FBI agent who had been interacting with the Tsarnaev family, I particularly loved this story because when they wrote about what he did, here's what he did. The Russians said, we have some information about this kid and his family, and we think that he's involved with some sort of terrorist activities, and you know, we urge you to take a look at him. Now, I mean, that's pretty much all the U.S. government seems to be in business these days is homeland security. So you would assume, well, they jump right on it. Well, and I was thinking, well, what would I do if somebody tipped me off that there was a potential terrorist in our midst? So let me ask you quickly, what would you do if you got a report that there was a potential terrorist in your midst? What would you do? You'd investigate him. Okay, and how would you do that? By the way, there's probably one of you who does, but that's okay. Because they always like to come to these things for enlightenment purposes. Sorry? Okay. See, now, look how intelligent this man is. So he's already qualified to be the director of the FBI because none of them thought of that. So what they did instead, they didn't put him under surveillance. You know what they went? They went to talk to him, and they said, are you a terrorist? I kid you not. You have to read this, you know. And then they went to their neighbors and they said, is your neighbor a terrorist? And they were like, no, I don't think so. Girlfriend? No, not that I know of. Okay, clean bill of health. I swear, this is what happened. And then I think the Russians indicated that, you know, he was going to maybe go to Russia or Chechnya and so forth. And he goes. And when he goes, there are normal flags that are supposed to be raised, and I know because they harassed me at the airport, you know, and so they did nothing to him. And when he was coming back through, somehow the border people who were monitoring, who knew a little bit about him, the flag was taken down. In other words, he was supposed to sail through. And this is very, very important because 9/11 was almost the exact same thing. All those guys were given those visas and stuff, and you know, Michael Springman, the U.S. consul, was objecting over the years to all of these guys who were, and he was saying, I don't, you know, they're lying and they want visas, and I can tell that this is not kosher, a funny term to use in Saudi Arabia, but anyway, and the higher ups just ordered him to admit all these people. And that's how we got them all, you know, in the U.S. training to fly planes.
I'm Mike Springman. Some 15 years ago now, I was chief of the visa section at the CIA's consulate at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. People were being brought there from all over the Middle East for visas to come to the United States. And I was told they were terrorists that were recruited to come to the U.S. for training and shipped back to Afghanistan for fighting the Soviet soldiers. I thought that, you know, this was really strange, but I couldn't explain it. And then when Trento and these other people started talking to me, and I said, well, this explains the whole thing. The reason why there was this pressure, the reason why these guys who were not businessmen, who were not educated, who were essentially low-level clerk-type people, supermarket checkers, you know, guys who worked in an auto parts store, why visas were being demanded for them. And you know, when I put the pieces together from my 3 contacts, it was people who were brought here, who were recruited by the CIA and its asset Osama bin Laden to come to the United States for training as terrorists and to return them to Afghanistan to fight with the Soviet soldiers there and kill them.
And so it's a very similar thing again, that they let these guys in. Now you say, well, what could possibly be going on here? And it seems to me, after years of studying this stuff, that really here's how it works. How does the FBI have such an incredible track record? How is it that they're always able to nail somebody? Anybody want to take a guess? They set them up. Okay. Something like that. Basically what you do, you know, they remember the motto, the FBI always gets its man. And then it occurred to me, they always get their man because it's their man. They know these guys, you know, they're in cahoots with them. They're going out for beers with them. And so it's a great system, you know, but it's a kind of corruption. And it's just like, you know, you go to have you take your car to the mechanic and, you know, it's a racket, right? And they flip something, they tell you, oh, you need this and you need that and so on, and it's often not true. Well, it's not just car mechanics, and there are many honest car mechanics, and perhaps more higher percentage of car mechanics than people in one of these agencies, you know. But it's easy to kind of dump on them, you know, because they don't have the same kind of lobbying power. But if you look at the FBI, they do this stuff all the time, and they get away with it all the time. And to get a sense of why that is, you have to take a look at, let's say, Dianne Feinstein recently complaining that the CIA was going into the senators' computers. You know, other people telling either publicly or privately that they've been threatened. I remember one U.S. senator once said to me, Russ, what do you think is the biggest industry in Washington? And I said, well, is it government and then maybe lobbying? And he said, maybe, but I would say the most powerful industry in Washington is sexual blackmail. Because we live in this kind of fantasy of perfection, that everybody is, you know, happy with the 10 kids they have, and that their marriage is fantastic, and they go to church regularly and so forth. And so there's nobody who's, you know, a kind of a flawed human being as in terms of the way that they have to sort of campaign and present themselves. And so it creates an impossible situation. There are how many people still in high levels of politics who are closeted, can't talk about their sexual orientation. And it's a real problem. And so they're all sort of trapped. And as you know, if you've ever read any books about J. Edgar Hoover, he was very much in the blackmail business, especially since he was able to stay in the closet, you know, dress up in women's clothes all those years and then harass gay liberation people. So very interesting situations. And this gets me back to the importance of what we're trying to do with Who, What, Why, which is to be honest. You know, we don't consider ourselves liberal or left or right or conservative or libertarian or anything. We feel that our job is to figure out what happened, what's happening, and report it. And believe it or not, there are a lot of things you can do in journalism that involve objectivity. You know, either there are 3 people sitting in those chairs or there aren't. You know, either there's a guy running a camera or 2 guys running a camera, or they're not. Now, somebody could say, well, there's only 1 guy running a camera because I don't see anybody at the other camera. I would say, well, he's just he's, you know, kneeling down or something. So, you know, these are things that can be factually resolved. And so, you know, drones, do they kill the people that they're wanting to kill? And the people they wanted to kill, did they have any justification to kill them? These are mostly things that we can investigate and we can solve. And we think it's a real public service. And more than that, it's absolutely crucial to the vitality of the democracy, and indeed even to our future as a free country and as a viable civilization, that we do this kind of work.